we'll do the live thing first. Like. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Bigmark podcast. This is me, your host, Bigmark. If it's your first time watching, welcome. If not, welcome back. Wherever you are watching or listening, make sure you follow along, whether it's Spotify or if you're watching on YouTube, subscribe to our channel, like the video, follow along when we drop new episodes, and always hit us up in the DMs, in the comment section, wherever you're at. Let us know what you think. If you can, shoot us a review. We'd really appreciate that. The higher the better. I know it doesn't sound like much, but it means a lot to us. And if you ever wanted to support the podcast, check out our Patreon, patreon.com/Bigmark Podcast. There's a few different levels to choose to donate. Thank you all to our current supporters. I really appreciate it. And you keep the lights on, the studio lights on. But yeah, thank you so much, everybody, for watching. Welcome. I'm really excited about today's episode because I'm kind of like, I'm in it. And this is like one of the reasons why I wanted to do the podcast in the first place, is to talk about, what it's like to be, a musician and the experiences and all that stuff, simultaneously, promoting my own band and other musicians and hopefully inspiring people to pick up and join. Cause obviously for longtime listeners, my background's varied enough that who knows, you can't really guess on paper what I'd necessarily end up doing. But, I grew up playing music, and it was always kind of there for me. And I'm really grateful and really excited to be able to be doing music as at least a hobby, more so of a hobby, more of a side gig. And, if anything, it's at least my passion. I'm really excited to continue to pursue it in all its different forms. But I'm really excited about today's episode because I'm talking about kind of one factor of music and art, the production of music and the expression of music, and that's music production. So basically anything in the studio. Obviously going to be talking a lot about producers themselves, but the other art form, the other side, the backside, the nitty gritty, the actual paintbrush to the canvas, the pen to paper, the actual recording of the music, it all comes into music production. I talked about live music and, how awesome that is and all the great things about that. And then, what it's like being in the studio. It's a completely different animal. And, I really, again, I'm super excited. And, we're going to be working with a new producer. And so my band Reckless Harbor. So again, for the new listeners, or just a refresher for anyone else. No, just kidding. But Reckless Harbor, my band, really cool band. Check us out. Reckless with a W, indie folk, super chill, super fun. Please check us out. Like I said, we're on Instagram right now. So at Reckless Harbor, Facebook and and I believe we have Twitter and stuff. We're working on the old TikToks, but, we have a couple songs that are on YouTube. So that's kind of our big thing right now is we've been having, sorry, I started that off wrong. We've recorded a couple songs kind of ourselves and we released them on YouTube. We didn't really get into the studio yet. We're really buckled down on playing shows and actually raising money to then get in the studio. And we're really lucky to be working with an awesome producer right now. He's out of like Brantford, Paris area. Really good musician in his own right. His name's Stephen Ryan. Check him out at Stephen Ryan at Stephen Ryan Music, on Instagram and everything like that. He works for Canary Music, which is an awesome record company, I guess you could call them, music distribution, but like an awesome setup and great studio. And also one of my band members, really good friends, John Harley, our fiddle player in the band. Him and Steven are very tight, and I'm super excited we actually had a chance to go over to his studio, the little shed studio, or in the back. I forget what he calls it. Sorry, Stephen. But he has literally like a shed on his property. It's a nice big, comfortable size studio shed, but it is a shed on the back of his property, and it's really cool walking back to it. But really awesome setup, and we were really fortunate. So as a band, any band, when you go into recording, or if you're a solo artist even, when you're going into record, again, it's a completely different beast. You might be really solid live, and you're great on stage, you have awesome presence, and you're comfortable, and you're killing it. Once you're in the studio, it becomes a completely different beast, because you don't really have anything to hide behind. You're listening to that music. You're listening to it coming right off the board. No fucking effects. No people yelling, people being drunk and just cheering because it's fun. It's the real raw deal. And that's a lot, not to handle, but it's something that you got to get used to. But it also helps elevate your playing, which is awesome. In the studio in general, you end up doing 17 million takes of all these songs, and it all like it just hones your craft even more. And that's honestly, it's kind of funny, like the recording process itself. It's almost like you kind of play a song so much, it almost is like eating too much ice cream, where it's really good, but then it starts to kind of get a little sickly sweet. And then you just are kind of just doing it, so you finish the whole bowl. But like, then you write something new and keep going. So in some ways it can potentially drive your writing, but then also you get to really get into songs and really figure them out. So there's a lot of approaches when you are going into the studio, in the sense that you can have everything done. So this is like very much the case for like a lot of first time bands, bands that, it's the first time the band has recorded an album. They basically have their whole life up until that moment to get songs ready. And a lot of bands obviously start out playing live, just much like us, and you get a repertoire down, and you get your set list down, and you get used to it, and you hone it, and you see the reaction of the crowd. And then by the time you get to the studio, everything's basically done. And that's like arrangement. And for anyone listening who doesn't know what arrangement is, it's basically just like how the song is going to be kind of structured, where the song's going to go, what instruments you're going to use, all these different, the kind of nitty gritty, not just like the music and the lyrics. That's obviously taken care of by the band, including the instrumentation, obviously, but that is something that, again, the producer is going to be really involved with. Because, like, I believe that music is analogous to sports in a lot of ways. Like the worlds of music and the world of sports, I think, are very interestingly similar, in the sense that obviously for team sports, you're on a team. You have a coach, other players on the team. Depending on what sport you're playing, each player is doing a specific task, and it's all leading out to the outcome of the game, or at least of how the sport is being played. Hopefully a win in the game, but you win and you lose. And music's interesting is the same, because you're in a band, and you have other members of the band that are playing their own instruments, and you're all dependent on each other, and you're traveling, and you're hanging out together, and you're technically working together. And I guess it even goes for like individual sports too, and you have solo artists out there, right? So all these things are so similar, right? And obviously in music, you don't really necessarily have a coach that's with you all the time, but in the studio, your producer kind of becomes your coach. And there's many different styles of coaching, and there's many different styles of being a producer, right? There's coaches that are going to be in there, and they're going to hold your hand through the whole thing and tell you exactly what to do. And if you do exactly what the coach tells you to do, it's going to come out the way he wants, and that's great. And hopefully your thoughts thoughts and hopes and prayers go along with what the coach wants to, and it's the same thing with a producer. There are producers out there that are a little bit more heavy-handed and are kind of like, I know what sounds best, or this is how I know how to produce best, and this is how I'm going to do it. And that can sadly, or not necessarily sadly, but that can go one of two ways, right? That can go down the road of, oh, this is great. It's exactly what I was thinking. We're right on track. We're thinking the same thing, and you end up working with that producer forever usually. Or you go, this isn't where I wanted to go at all, and you end up butting heads with the producer the whole time. And you hear stories about this all the time of artists butting heads with producers. And again, that's similar to some coaching styles too, where coaches are so hard-headed and in some ways testing you to even see if they have a shred of being like open-minded in some ways. They're almost testing you to see like, all right, well, if you do think you can do better, then do better. So, because essentially that's the role of a producer. It's having the guts, because sometimes you're working with crazy artists that are, obviously mega artists out there need to record albums too. And sometimes you're working with those mega artists, and you have to be able to tell them, hey, this is great, but this sucks. Why isn't this as good as that? And you know what I'm saying? So it takes a lot of guts to be able to say that, right? And you need that sometimes as an artist, because you can get really kind of stuck in your own world sometimes. And again, there's many, like I said, there's all those different types of producers, and those kind of more heavy-handed producers have their opposite too, where you have producers that essentially are there to completely guide the artist's idea into reality. Now back to Reckless Harbor's story. We actually had an awesome opportunity that Steven allowed us to come into his studio and work with him all day for a day. And we were really lucky to be able to essentially take the three main approaches to recording. So as much as there's many different producers, there's also many different styles of recording. Now, back in the day, when big record studios or recording studios existed, and record budgets from record companies were like $400,000, and you could fucking have drinks and food and people, and you're paying an engineer and a sound guy and the producer, and there's all these different people, and there's so many different hands in the pot. Things have changed drastically since then. But more or less the approaches to actually capturing that music is more or less the same, the same. It exists. It exists. The whole digital to analog switch over when we kind of moved out of the analog realm into digital. A lot of those things that we did in the analog realm, we took over. So that's what I'm trying to say. And those there's basically three main approaches, and the approaches being, you can record a band basically live off the floor. So when you're going to actually do the recording and capture the song, you can just say, okay, band, play like you're playing like a live show. And then you just record everything. You get the mics in the right position. Now, obviously, pros to this, it's very natural sounding. It kind of makes it sound like you're in the room with the band. Cons, really hard to mic everything at once, because what happens is when you have multiple microphones recording at once and the band is in the same room together, it's really, really difficult to not get bleed between the microphones. So that's where other microphones that are meant to be picking up a certain instrument are also intercepting the sound from other instruments that is not supposed to be recording. Now, the downside to that is that if you ever wanted to edit the song after, or input, like overdub is what they call. So there's recording and you overdub. So you record onto something that's already recorded. Again, another remnant of analog technology. But when you overdub something, you're not going to be able to match everything, because you're going to have to somehow mix it in from the other band, but then that bleed from the other instruments has to be so it becomes more difficult. It's not completely impossible with today's digital recording, but it's really hard to make like edits on the fly. So you have to be really tight as a band when you go and do this recording. You have to be right on. There's many famous stories of artists having to do hundreds, like over 100 takes of songs, because they wanted to get it perfect all the way through. And again, back in the day when you were doing that on tape, A, that was wasteful of the tape. B, you could only re-record on tape so much because you literally would wear it down. Or like you run out of tape. Like you only have so much fucking tape. So things have changed now. Obviously, you can re-record and record and do this and do that a million different times, and it's all good. No one, as long as you got enough memory on your computer, you can keep going to town. But obviously, everyone doesn't have all the time in the world either. But that being said, you got to be pretty much bang on when you're recording live off the floor, as they call it. There's also the opposite of live off the floor, which is called multi-tracking. So basically what you're doing is you're recording each individual instrument's performance of the song. So, if there's, for instance, with Reckless Harbor, we have 4 instruments and 4 singers: guitar, bass, drums, violin, banjo, I guess a 5th instrument, sometimes a mandolin, but there's 4 of us at any given time playing. And what we would do is we would record the bass on its own. We record the guitar, we record the banjo, record the violin all on its own from start to finish, along with a ghost track, which would be most likely just one person with an acoustic guitar and singing, just to give us the cues and the timing and make sure everyone's all tight with that. And then every band member does that, and then you do the vocals on top of that. Each band member does their vocals, and then you put it all together, and it should line up as long as everyone played to the click track properly. You line up all the dots and all the T's, and then that kind of gives you essentially, like, I guess in some ways, the perfect representation of the song. Perfectly mic'd, there's no bleed. You can go in there, you can alter things digitally. Pros, like I'm saying, it's a lot easier to go in there and overdub on top of things. Cons, it can kind of sound a little bit robotronic, especially if you're not used to it, right? Because that's the other thing, is that because the recording process is a process, if you've never done it, it's a new thing that you have to get used to. And again, bands as they went on, especially if you look back in the 70s and things like that, albums started to get a little bit more experimental, because I'm sure bands started feeling a little bit more comfortable in the studio and able to use the studio essentially as an instrument, which is a really interesting concept. That, again, as you get to know how things work, the different sounds and the different ways you can manipulate the sound through a soundboard and just EQ or effects and all these different things, like the palette, if you're painting a picture, your palette has just extended, infinitely in some ways. And then there's a third approach to recording is kind of a hybrid technique, which would be merging merging the two somewhere in between live and multi-track. So maybe you record all the instruments live, or maybe you record the drum if you have drums in your band, maybe you record drums and bass first, and then record everyone singing at once, and it gives it a little bit more warm kind of feel, and then you can kind of put the two together. Now, again, like I said, we were lucky enough to go into Steven's studio and do all 3 in one day, and it was awesome. And I know two of our band members haven't recorded professionally before, and it was a great experience for them. It was a great experience for us entirely as a whole band, because we got to see these different ways and then listen to the results and kind of compare. And, again, we're super lucky. And again, thank you again, Stephen, for allowing us to do this. And not every producer would allow this, but because we got the friends and family in, the discount, the rate, the everything, the behind the curtain pass, whatever you want to call it. We were able to do that, and again, super grateful. And it's awesome that it went really well, and then it helped with our decision to then work with Steven, and we're super excited to see what happens. Hopefully what we'll do is we'll kind of record three songs, release those because we just don't have anything on streaming platforms. Like, that's the problem. And especially a lot of these, not only grant applications, but a lot of these like festivals and things like that require an application. They also ask you, like, hey, can you give us like some of your streaming, or like give us the link to your streaming platforms or your songs on streaming platforms. Anyway, you know what I'm trying to say. So we're really excited to do that and release the 3, wait a bit, release another 3, wait a bit. Like, I'm talking about like maybe a month or less in between. And then we release everything at once, because essentially with the when you're recording an album, you're essentially, it's a snapshot in time of who your band is at that moment. In 2023, remnants of 2022, what are the memories? It becomes like somewhat almost a diary. It becomes this memory box, this keepsake of, hey, this is what we were like, this is what we were thinking about, this is what we were doing. And we recorded those songs more or less around the time we wrote them. And this is how we feel. Again, because it's our first album, and forever, we'll always have songs that we've kind of worked on and are like more in the hopper and things like that. But when we bring that forth and put it in and put it on paper, or put it on wax, or put it in the interwebs, however you want to look at it, it becomes a snapshot in time. And that's what we want to do, and capture that and get that out there, on top of all those other reasons. So we're really looking forward to it. We're super excited. As I mentioned before, there's nothing beats after you're done recording and you're getting a first takedown, and you're listening to it right off the board, right through the monitors, in the perfect treated room. Oh, the sound is just beautiful. It's the best experience. One of the pleasures of being a musician that's able to record. And again, the one thing where I always draw the line between music and sports is that, you have games, aka performances, and some games are more important than others. But you don't really have championships in music as much as you do yet. Maybe you get awards and things like that. But there's not really a head-to-head battle with things like that. But in the studio, that almost becomes your moment where it's the Super Bowl, it's the championship, it's the World Series all at once, because everything you've worked for, all the skills that you have are going to be on display. They're going to be challenged. You're going to be asked for, especially if you're trying to create some things in the studio too, right? If you're like, oh, I want to, like, because like we're coming to this project, like I mentioned before, with songs ready. Like a lot of bands have their songs ready because they've had their whole life up until the point of their first album, like I mentioned before, to get ready. There are also bands that go into the studio more or less with just a general idea or almost no idea, and they write in the studio, because it becomes this super focused area where you do have all these things at your fingertips, all these sounds, all this ability to record and listen back and be like, what is this actually like? Because this is also becomes the other great role of a producer, when you're a musician, you become in on it, and you're writing, or like, let's say Reckless Harbor, we go up to a cottage and we spend a long weekend and we write a bunch of songs, and we're in it, and we become locked into this microcosm of our own creation. And then we bring it to a producer and he says, yeah, that's good, but you got to play like a B there, or like there needs to be a bridge, or like that should be, a C minor, or, shit like that, where you sometimes need someone to hone that in. And in the studio, it becomes that moment where, like I said, all your skills are challenged, all your preconceived plans, all the practices and rehearsals and games leading up, and shows leading up to that moment are challenged. And it's a great feeling. And when you come out of the studio with a great song and it sounds good, it's a great sense of accomplishment. But also it fucking sucks when you don't live up to your expectations. And I think a lot of musicians are hard on themselves in that way, where, especially when you're leading up to it, a project, and you have all these ideas in your head, like, it's difficult to bring those ideas into reality. For any artist, for anybody who has lofty ideas or plans or anything they want to do, it's not always that easy to bring those ideas into reality. And the funny thing is that there's many different, you have access, even if you have a laptop at home right now, if it's a MacBook, it came with something called GarageBand, and that basically is like a simpler version of like a professional recording studio right now. Yeah, it doesn't have all the cool microphones and all that stuff, which make a huge difference. But a lot of the major songs you hear on the radio right now were made on someone's laptop, and it's given people a lot of freedom to be able to make music in their basement and things like that. But I think we lost touch with, again, like I mentioned before, you used to be working with a team of people in a recording studio that had worked with hundreds of other bands and had all this experience and all this knowledge and all this know-how and the equipment and all that shit too. But it became this collaborative effort where you're now working with a producer, and it's difficult, right? Like, it's hard to choose a producer, because as much as you think sometimes it would be nice for someone to just yes you to death, and anything you say, they go with it and they try to turn it to reality. Sometimes you don't actually need that. It might be something you want, but it might not be something you need. And sometimes you might need that hard-handed, heavy-handed producer to be like, no, this is how it's going to be, and you're going to trust me, you're going to like it at the end of the day. Right? As long as that's always the idea, and that it's not just, I'm just doing it the way I want to do it. It's all about giving the song what it needs. It's all about, lending yourself to the song and supporting that and giving yourself into what the song needs. And as long as you can do that and put the song above yourself, it becomes, every decision from there only leads you towards making the song better. Rick Rubin, probably one of the most famous living producers right now, might not know a lot about music. In fact, he talks about not knowing a lot about theory and fucking notes and what to do where and time signatures and things like that. But he prides himself on essentially being a tastemaker, but also like knowing what sounds good and what doesn't. And that's essentially what everyone wants. And that's why Rick Rubin is so hard to find and get a hold of, and why he's so successful, is because he can do that and he can say that, because it's hard to even articulate that sometimes, right? And he's able to focus completely on songs and give himself completely to the artists that he works with. And I don't know, like, he doesn't seem like he's like an aggressive guy, but there's probably times where he fucking shatters people's worlds, because again, sometimes you need that producer to say, no, that doesn't sound fucking good, but this sounds good. or try doing it like this. And again, I'll do this forever, but the analogies between sport and music, where if you're coachable, if you're able to listen to those instructions, that relationship between the player and coach, or the musician and the producer, becomes that much easier, because now it's a give and take. They know that if they tell you something, you're going to try it, and you're going to trust them to fucking jump off the cliff, and it hopefully it sounds fucking good. And if it sounds good, you love it. And then when it comes to you giving a suggestion, hopefully if they're fucking fair, they're going to bend a little bit too, because you're collaborating and trying to find that equal ground, or again, serving the song is what it's all about. And that's the greatest thing that you can do in the studio. And we're really lucky to be able to do this with the band. And anyone out there, if you're in a band, try to find a studio, or even try to do it yourself, because you learn so much, and you can get so much tighter, and you can really listen to things, because you don't want to get caught up in your own microcosm. You don't want to get caught up in your own echo chamber where you're not even really sure if it fucking sounds good, because you don't know where you stand. But that's where a great producer comes in. So if you're in a band, and even if you're not, thank your local producer. Anyway, thank you all for listening. That was a really fun episode. I really enjoyed talking about that, and I'm super excited to see what comes from our recording with Steven. Again, check out Steven Ryan Music, everybody. Check out Reckless Harbor, Reckless with a W, on all social media. Check out our YouTube page. Check out some of our songs. Those are the couple songs that we have out on YouTube right now on our channel. Those are the ones that we're going to be recording, plus another one probably. And yeah, like us, share us, DM us at the Bigmark Pod, at the Bigmark Podcast. If you ever wanted to reach us, please feel free to reach out. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe, like the video, tell a friend. Check out our Patreon, patreon.com/thebigmarkpod, if you ever wanted to support. And again, thank you all for listening. I really hope everyone will support the band. I know you will. That's what this is all about. It's about community, the Bigmark Podcast community. Love y'all. Peace.